Hey, friends, and welcome back to the Show Up season of The Mary Moran Show, a season all about how we never asked you to be perfect. We just asked you to show up. And today I have the huge honor of now sitting down for a second time with my incredible friend and fellow author, Jason VanRuler, to talk all about how our past shapes how we show up and how we communicate with the world around us as we dig into his brand new book, Discovering Your Communication Type: The 5 Paths to Deeper Connections and Stronger Relationships, and also probably some of his first book, Get Past Your Past, which if you haven't listened to that episode, make sure you go back and check that one out too. If you are someone who feels like you are being called to write or speak or just show up and lead in some way, but the voice of fear keeps whispering, who's ever going to care about this? Your story disqualifies you. And most importantly for today's episode, your voice doesn't matter, then woo, buddy, just get ready. This episode is for you. Jason, welcome back to the Mary Moran Show.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love talking with you. It's always a great time. So I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, same. Okay, we're going to jump right in. I know you are very busy. You've got a bunch of these today, and I want to get as much out of this time together as I can because I am loving this book. We talked about in your previous episode that those of us who grew up with rough pasts, hard stories, we love the self-improvement. We love knowing all about ourselves.
We're keeping the industry afloat. It's kind of on us to do this. Yes.
That's right. And so I love a type book. I love a book that tells you all about your types. So let's jump right in. This book identifies 5 paths that really represent 5 communication types. So just give us the lay of the land. What are they?
Yeah, so I wanted to make this book something that we could see ourselves in, but see other people in as well. And so it follows a model. It's called the PATHS model, so PATHS. And I'll just explain each of them briefly. But basically, the argument is that we all have a why behind why we communicate. So for instance, you and I could use any words we wanted or talk about anything we wanted. Why are we talking about this? Why does this matter to us? And so the different types are as follows. The P is a peacemaker. And a lot of people are familiar with that terminology, that language. And basically, a peacemaker enters into every conversation going, how do I smooth out the rough edges? How do I talk in such a way that it's not going to create conflict or create rough spots, or it's not going to create issues? And so while that's a gift, just like all of them, there's no one better than the others, but they're all gifts and opportunities. So the gift of a peacemaker is we need those people, right? Peace is great. We love that. And the opportunity is not everything is peaceful. There's not always peace. The next one is the advocate. And the advocate is really concerned with what's fair, what's right, and what's just. I always describe them as if you're in a room and you're like, is someone going to say something? They will say something. Yes, they're just like, I am ready. I've been waiting for this moment, and they will say it. Their opportunity is you don't always have to say the thing, and not everything warrants you to intervene. The next one is the thinker, and the thinker is your kind of classical internal processor. They're very choosy with their words. They're analytical, they're factual. And so when they speak, it's to get it right. So they're like, I don't want anybody to think that I said something stupid or that didn't make sense. And so I'm very careful. Their challenge is they're not always huge on feelings. So sometimes they will communicate much more about facts than about feelings. But thankfully, we have the H, which is the harbor, and that's me. And we love a good feeling discussion. So our own feelings, your feelings, everyone's feelings, we can make space for. But I always say this makes us kind of a bad party guest. And the reason for that is
Yes.
I've been to parties where my friends have literally said, Jason, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, that guy you just met left crying. I'm like, well, I wouldn't say it was a full-on cry. I mean, it was maybe a little tearful, And they're like, what did you say? And I was like, well, I was just asking about his relationship with his mother. And they're like, stop doing
stuff.
that. We're at a dinner party. Can you just talk about work or something? And so our goal or our opportunity is that not everybody wants to talk about feelings all the time. Kind of time or
what
place.
Do you mean? I'm like the Jennifer Lawrence meme. What do you mean? What do you mean?
I know, I'm like, I only want to. And then the S is the spark. And sparks are super fun. They're the people with all the energy and the charisma, and that's wonderful. They can work a room, but their opportunity is slowing down enough to kind of see those places that need time, and also understanding not everything's fun all the time, which is a total bummer. But not everything is fun all the time, and so that's kind of their room for growth.
Yeah, and you actually, this is getting a little bit ahead of us into kinda like their strengths and weaknesses, which you've been touching on as well, but you'd said like the sparks, the sentence that kinda goes along with that is like a lot of people like them, but like the people closest to them might not. Or so there was like a tighter way of writing that. But can you just talk about that a little bit of like when they're the like vivacious, gregarious ones at the party, there's got to be somebody cleaning up the kitchen, kind of an idea.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
get it. And so, what they need a lot of is kind of a setup. They kind of need the person to give them the alley oop. And so it's
Yeah.
like, well, you have that backstage person, and that can be challenging to be a backstage person to a spark. Because in conversations, they're kind of looking for that opportunity to take it and make it something bigger. And so, while that's compelling for an audience, it just is a little difficult in a personal relationship. And I'm sure you know people like this just like I do, but I've got some great friends who are sparks, and I know how to get them off the phone. All I have
Yeah.
to do is say one maybe negative thing, and they're like, "This has been great. Take care." So they're like, "How's it going this week?" And I'm like, "I got this opportunity. This is awesome." And I'm like, "And my taxes are due." And they're like, "Okay, take care.
Yeah.
See you around."
We're
I don't
out.
want to talk about that. And
Yeah.
so it limits deep relationship if they're not careful.
Yeah. So I had it in my notes, like I was gonna have you guess what you thought I was since you've studied this deeply. I was gonna guess what I thought you were. I feel like we've maybe tipped our hands, but did you have a feeling coming in, what you thought
I've
which
got
5
some
of the 5
feelings.
types? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've got some feelings, but I want to hear it from you. I Because here's what I've learned is we can be really good at speaking a different type if it fits our environment, but we do kind of hold on to one that's ours. And so while I'm usually like, oh, I think I can guess, I'm always like, I'll reserve the right to be surprised.
Okay, so that answer actually sets up my question, which is what I was
Mm,
really asking really, really well. So when I was, you were first introducing the paths with the idea of Mont Blanc, the different ways to
mm,
climb a very tall mountain. We all get to the same place, but we're going up different routes. The harbor was sort of described as like they're the ones checking in on everybody, and they almost came across a little bit like a doormat or like
mm.
I don't need to get to the peak. I just need to make sure everybody else does. And I'm like, nope, I super need to get to the peak, you know. And so I thought maybe I was not a harbor, but then I read the full chapter on the harbor, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally a harbor. But I think that I might have a streak through me, and I wonder if you do too, and if this is even if streaks are even allowed in this format
I'll
framework.
think about it. I'll let you know. I'll consider it.
Well, here's what's hilarious about that answer. Here's what's hilarious about the answer. First, I said, "Do you have any feelings about it?" Feelings, 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 harbor. Then I
Yeah,
say this, and you go, "I'll think about it." So my question is, can harbors have a streak of thinker if they have that kind of like IQ, EQ kind of
yeah.
thing going?
Yeah, my experience is we have a primary and secondary. And so sometimes those are close, but we have that one that's kind of our go-to. And then and I want to do more research on this, but a lot of times what I find is that we have a primary and a secondary, and then our spouse overlaps, usually with our
Mm,
secondary. That's
interesting.
what I've been seeing a lot is we often have different primaries, but the secondary can overlap.
Interesting. Ooh, okay, okay. Let's keep going. Let's dig in a little deeper here. You mentioned when the book starts that there are frameworks that came before that this builds on top of. You talked about
Mhm.
the attachment theory, which we're going to talk about at the bottom of the episode. You talked about this thing called the Big Five personality model. And I was like, what is this? I do not know this one, and I need to know it right now. And then you talked about some overlap with the Enneagram. So tell us what the Big Five is, and then talk about how there's some overlap with the Enneagram types and these communication types.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So what I wanted to do, I always think there's nothing new under the sun. So we're going to take from existing things, and the big five is really your big five personality traits that actually were the catalyst and had a lot to do with like your Myers Briggs. So if you think about your Myers Briggs with introversion, extroversion, things like that, that big five factored into it, and then it's also part of the Enneagram. So if you think of all of these as circles, they're overlapping all over the place. And so what I wanted to do, and it's kind of like, Peacemaker is an Enneagram term, but it's also just a term in general. But what I wanted to do was honor what came before.
Mm,
Because I think, I did a bunch of research and I'm creative and wanted to come up with something, but I also wanted to honor that a lot of this is, these are just themes and threads in humanity. And so when we think about these different personality types and how they factor into this, what I learned is there was not really an existing communication type model. It was more personality. And so I wanted to build something on that.
mm. Yeah. And so just give us like some quick examples. Obviously, the Enneagram 9 Peacemaker is to the Peacemaker in the paths, but what about the other four?
Yeah, I mean, so when you think about that, they're just, I think, tendencies to overlap. So there's not a direct correlation. They're just things that are kind of in that same area. The peacemaker, I think that can be your personality type, but you might be an advocate.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
you can have the wiring, which makes you really geared internally for that. But what I was looking at is really what's the why behind why we communicate. And that why that we communicate, I found, is often developed in childhood as a response to something our family needed. So an example I'll give you is, I grew up in the Midwest and grew up in a religious family, and I'm, almost all Dutch. My grandmother says, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. So, almost all Dutch,
Yeah.
and if you aren't Dutch, you are still much. So I've
Oh,
adjusted
good.
that. But I grew up in a house where, believe it or not, there wasn't a lot of talk about feelings.
Mm, yeah.
And so as a kid, what we do is our adaptive child is we kind of go, what needs to be said? Okay. And so what we learn is we learn how to be useful in that environment. And so my family, they're still surprised I'm a therapist. They're like, how did this happen? What is going on with you? Why we thought you'd be a farmer or an accountant or,
Yeah.
but what happened is somebody needed to say the thing. And so what I found is that while we have definite personality styles and traits, and I mean, you can go DISC and Myers-Briggs and Big Five, and all those things are true, our communication's a little different because it's how we decide what to talk about.
Interesting. Ooh, interesting. So, yeah, I had it in the questions to go. I used to think I was an Enneagram 3. I now know I'm an Enneagram 4, self-preserving. Looks
Mm.
like a 3, actually, though, more of a 4. In your like research or your studying of this, do 4s tend to be one of the 5 types, or it could just be totally random on all the other
Could be
factors?
totally separate. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
All
because
right.
I think that's just it's built on it, but it's not about that.
Got it.
It's really what did the situation demand of me and how did I learn to operate in that?
Yeah. Okay. So similar to the Enneagram, you also make a point to say that no one of the communication types is better. That they all have
Yes.
strengths,
I
they
feel
all
like
have
that's an
weaknesses.
important disclaimer, don't
Yeah.
you? That's
Yes.
important to say because we all go,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't like that one. I
Yeah.
don't know about that one." Yeah,
Yeah.
Jason, and I've had people say, "Well, Jason, maybe none are better, but like, is there one a little bit better?" It's
Yeah.
like, no, they're all the same.
But it's Harbor, right? Just checking.
It's, I mean, between you and I, it is definitely Harbor.
Totally,
Yes, don't tell
totally.
anyone. Don't tell anyone. Yes.
I love it. Okay, so you talk about we talked about this, we've just to kind of lay some of the groundwork, you talked about, like, the peacemaker can bring calm to the situation, that's a strength of theirs, the advocate can bring truth, the thinker brings clarity, the harbor brings emotional depth, the spark brings creativity and momentum, but they all have and you talked about the opportunities. Are there anything else you wanna say about, like, the specific, like, "These are your strengths, but here's your weaknesses?" Anything we need to know about our type based on, like, before we move forward of, like, "Oh, we should probably pay attention to this to improve in this area?"
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that goes across the board is just self awareness.
Yeah.
We all want to believe that we're self aware and we know how things land. And I mean, this was especially humbling for me as I wrote a book on communication. Is there were several moments where I'm writing a page out and I'm like, oh, I think I should listen to that. That actually that might be for me
Yeah.
more than for someone else. And so
Yeah.
I think the thing we have to pay attention to is number one, this isn't about just finding people like you. So if you and I just said, well, we're just going to find all the harbors we can find and we're going to cut everybody else out, we actually wouldn't be better for it. So I think the challenge is learn how to operate in different rooms and then know how it's received with different people. I think unfortunately we can be really destructive if we're just speaking our type and it conflicts with somebody else's type and we don't have awareness about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kinda talking about that, the conflict that comes up. One of the earlier pages in the book says, "We just can't communicate." You say, "As a husband, father, and therapist, I've witnessed conversations full of potential for connection fall apart mid-sentence." And I just wrote in my notes, like, all caps, "Yes!" Exclamation point, like,
Yeah.
what is that about? Um,
Yes.
Justin and I most days will not only finish each other's sentences, one of us will
Mm,
be thinking the sentence and the other one will say it before we even get a chance to. Like, we call it being on the same lambda. We're that level of like sharing a brain most
I
days.
love that.
And then some days, like the rarer days, but there's enough of them that woof, what in the world? We wake up and it's like we chose to just speak totally different languages that day, like English and Latin or Pig Latin or whatever. And so, you talk in the book about the people that you are closest to. That's kind of like this can happen with them more because I don't know, do we take for granted we're speaking fluently the same language? Do we just allow more of ourselves to show up? Like how, basically, how do I stop having those days and we just finish each other's sentences every day for the rest of my life? That would be great. No, just kidding.
Well,
That's a
you
big
actually
question.
don't want that. Yeah, no, I
Right,
mean, what's interesting, and because I'm like you, I'm always like, how do we make it so it just works all the time?
right.
And what's interesting from the research is we actually need some friction to have a great relationship. So if
Yeah.
we never had those days, believe it or not, it would negatively impact our relationship. But we can have those days and do it better. And so what I found is, we can be masterful at kind of speaking all the types, but when we get activated, we go back to our primary. And so if our primary is a little bit different than our persons, that's where we usually clash. And so this has been evident to me even when I've done relational counseling with people where they're pre-marriage and they're like, we get along. This is like the most magical time ever. And then we had a real life stressor occur, and now we can't communicate anymore. And what that's often about is we go back to our primary type and we don't have a lot of awareness of how that impacts the other person.
Interesting. Yeah, so I'm fairly convinced he's not taken your assessment, but I've taken it for him.
You've got it. You've already got his answers.
I'm
Yes.
fairly certain Justin's a peacemaker. I feel like that's very safe. I think he's an Enneagram 9, and we've already established there's not always a crossover there, but I'm pretty sure he's the peacemaker.
So
And
it
yeah.
works
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
it's about how we feel. And then when it's about how we
Oh, wow.
feel, we
Yes.
start to see it with different stakes, right? So for you, you go, "Hey, I love this conversation. This
Yeah.
is this is depth, this is connection." But for a peacemaker, it's kind of like I need to stay on this very narrow track, and
Mm,
if I go off, this whole thing's going to fall apart.
interesting.
And so
Yes.
now I'm going to either have to do a lot of polishing or I'm going to have to avoid it. And meanwhile, you or I would show up and go like, I love this. I love
Yeah.
this. One of my favorite things to do in a marriage is like, let's sit down and let's talk about how we feel about each other. And
Mm.
and my sweet wife is a thinker, and she's like, this is terrifying. This is not a way to spend a Saturday, Jason. I do not want to do this because to her it's something different. To
Yeah.
her it's kind of this thing of like, well, you're going to say a bunch of stuff, but is it accurate? Is it factual? Do you have supporting evidence for this? And I go, well, I don't think you need to. It's just how I feel.
Right. Right. That makes sense to me. You talk about that, building on that a lot of us aren't even doing the work to be fluent in our own language, let
No.
alone doing the work to be fluent in, people we work with or our spouse or whatever the case is. So I have a really big, hard question pretty here, early here in the top of the episode.
Okay.
We're going to
I'm
figure it
ready,
out
I think.
together.
I've had
It's
coffee today, so
okay,
I'm
good.
ready. Yes.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to set it up and then we'll riff on it a little bit. So the really big question right off the bat is we're going to kind of like hone in for a second here on this side of it of honing our communication as a writer or speaker or leader or content creator, whatever. And what we know is that the US population, on average, about 50% or more of the US population has a reading comprehension of like fifth grade or lower. Then you add in things like we're a super distracted population. We're scrolling, we're not paying attention. And what we're seeing is publishers encouraging us to use simpler, more watered down words to meet more people where they are. Instagram posts, you can have less and less and less and less text on a graphic if you want people to slow down long enough to read it. So it's not like one sentence. That's my post. You're seeing movie studios ask the directors to do recaps. I talked about this in a solo episode. Matt Damon was talking about Netflix asking them to recap the rip over and over and over again because people aren't paying attention. So the big, tough, hard question is to meet someone else at their level of communication, not just their style, but their level of communication. Do you think it's more like we speak up here and we ask people to rise to our level? Do we change our communication to meet people at theirs? And if it's the second one, where does it end? Does it
Hmm.
become kind of a race to the bottom? Last bit of nuance there, I had teacher friends who said the school would really pressure them to teach to the bottom of the class. And they were really adamant about wanting to teach to the top of the class in the whole tide rises or what have you. So, really big question that's not specifically in a chapter in this book, but I feel like you and I can riff on this and find our way through it. If we're trying to change our language to be fluent in somebody else's, where do the levels come into play?
Yeah. Well, that is a good question. That's a big question.
Huge.
I feel like we I guess what comes to mind for me is I feel like we meet people where they're at and continue walking. So that's what I'm always trying to do, even in my practice or if I'm working with a team, is I'll meet you where you're at, but I want to stay on the move because I don't want to stay there. And so, I had a running coach for a while, and it was a great coach. And I would always say, why are you running just a little ahead of me? And they'd go, oh, so you run faster. So
That's
you run
right.
faster.
That's right.
And I go, oh, okay. And I'd say, but can't you run faster than you're running now? They'd go, oh, I can run a lot faster. I want to
Interesting.
run in between where I could run and where you can run. And I think our best communication is kind of doing a version of that where we
Mm-hmm.
go, if I can run a lot faster, I'll meet you where you're at, but I want you to try to keep up a bit, and
Yes.
then we'll do it together.
Perfect answer. Just a
I think we
just a
just solved it.
pause.
That was easy.
That
That
was
was
it.
easy.
It was not a big question. You just solved it in 10 seconds. That's great. Okay,
But
well,
I do
moving
agree
on.
with you. It is hard because we lose something. I mean,
Yeah.
I think about even when I was in graduate school and I read differently, I spoke differently, all those things, and then you kind of get into more society, and if we're not challenging each other, we kind of that falls
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Gosh, we won't get into this for the sake of time or my ranting level, but I read a really interesting thread that was talking about what we're losing by not sitting through the edginess and reaching for AI to put our thoughts together for us every time. And it's the same idea. Okay, all right. Well, let's keep moving. So, building on that, this idea of beginning to try to understand each other, there's a point in the book where you also compare the different paths that we're on, communication styles, to different accents and how your
Mhm.
accent can begin to tell people what your origin was, where the places where you're starting. And you say, the unlike an accent, a path might not be so obvious. You say miscommunication isn't just about saying the wrong thing, it's about speaking from one path while assuming the other person is on that same path with you. You go on geography, education, family dynamics, trauma history, spiritual formation, personality, and birth order all influence a person's communication. Much of how we speak comes from what we've learned, and what we've learned gets filtered through our personality as well as our desires and fears. You say, here's the problem. A lot of us don't even realize we're on a path. That's where conflict often starts. We don't understand our own style, so we miss the impact it has on others. And if we don't understand the path someone else is on, we're bound to misinterpret their words, tone, or intent. And so that line, especially the much of how we speak comes from what we learned, reminds me and underestimated. I talk about limiting belief leaks
Mm.
and how our families of origin will intentionally or unintentionally say, oh, you're never going to do that. Oh, you won't stay in school that long, or whatever the case may be, because they're really speaking to themselves and they often don't even realize this like monologue is even happening. They're just sort of they're not even aware they're even talking some of the time. And so just talk for a little bit about this. We don't even know we're on a path. We
Mhm.
often don't even know the language we've adopted because we don't even, realize that it's coming from what somebody else said to us. And so how do we begin that you talked about self-awareness? How do we even begin to kind of catch it mid-sentence, especially when the path that we're on, the communication is being shaped by what we've been brought up to believe is limited about ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you take the assessment, you learn about it, you develop. I mean, I think so much of this comes from taking on new information, whether it's, in the book or somewhere else, and then asking some questions. I think for a lot of us, it's just easy to get comfortable and never ask questions. And so sometimes when I'm working with someone and I'll say like, hey, it seems like in your communication, it's really important for you to have peace in a conversation. A lot of people go, "Oh, is it? Is it really? I never really knew that." Or going back to my example of the dinner party, I'm like, I'm just being me. Am I really leaning on the feelings? And they're like, "Yeah, you're making everyone cry all the time." And so you have to have a certain posture of willingness to hear how it sounds to other people. And you
Yeah.
have to have a willingness to ask yourself some questions of whose story am I repeating? And I think if we're not careful, we spend our whole life repeating other people's stories, or maybe even stories we heard through media that aren't even ours. And so there's this importance of kind of stopping and just saying, like, what do I really believe? What's really going on? Where's this really coming from? And I think that's sometimes a scary process, but a necessary one if we actually want to connect with people.
Gosh, I love that. And that actually leads perfectly into the next question, which is like I think one of the reasons we don't really want to look too close in the mirror is because then we get to see all the junk that's kind of hanging out there underneath the surface, including what those deepest, most core fears are. And you actually break apart, like break down what the core fears of each of the paths are. So you can either do it for just a couple of them if you want, or if you know them from, memory, you can
Hmm.
tell us all five. But like when you say core fear, what do you mean by that? And what are some examples?
Yeah, so I mean, like, if they're exiting a conversation, which we've all done, when you exit the conversation and then you're laying awake later and you're
3
going,
a.m. Wrong
yeah,
time.
let's analyze this. That's one of my favorite hobbies. I like to set the alarm and wake up at 3 a.m. and just be anxious about something.
Totally.
But each of our communication types has a different thing they care about, right? So I mean, the advocate would be really concerned with, was there something that was said that was unfair, unjust, and I didn't speak to it, and for me, as a person who's a harbor, it would be, was there a feeling there that I didn't ask about, or did I not share something, did I not make space? Peacemakers, looking at that kind of idea of peace, is, did I actually start some conflict? Are they left with some bad thoughts about me? You have the thinker, and it's funny because my wife is a thinker, but she'll lay awake at night wondering if what she said was accurate. So there's this kind of fear of like, well, I said that. Was that true? Was that really how it is? And the spark is kind of about the energy. So they're like, did I leave people feeling happy? Did I leave them wanting more? Or did I kind of bring down the tone?
Okay, let's start to just like go through a few of them a little
Mhm.
more granularly. Oh, I just really wanted to use that in casual
Yeah.
conversation. A little more granularly, Jason. We're
I
going
like
to
that.
do that.
I'm in favor. I'm in favor of it. That's a good one.
Okay, but I just have to like,
We can get
also
granular.
humble myself by saying I got that word from the Weather Channel. If you want the 15-minute by 15-minute forecast, it's more granular.
It's a little more
Okay.
granular. I like that.
Okay, so in each of the types, so each you have a chapter for each of the paths. You break down a few different things, like what a metaphor for them is, what they are under stress. And one of my favorite things is to say this to them, not that.
Mhm.
If you're going to speak to somebody who you think is a peacemaker or thinker or spark, you want to say these kinds of things to them, not this. So for the peacemaker, you say the metaphor is stagnation. And I thought that was so beautiful and so accurate for the peacemaker in my life that I love. And so just talk about that water as stagnation as a peacemaker.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's interesting about water is when it becomes stagnant, it becomes toxic, and it actually happens faster than you think. And so kind of the challenge is, we don't want it to be stagnant, but we understand that movement is going to be scary. And so how do we lean into that? And then if I'm going to talk to someone who's a peacemaker, knowing that that's the why behind why they communicate, how do I make them okay so we can maybe have that hard conversation? Because otherwise, if I come in it and as a harbor, I go, well, let's just talk about my feelings, and I've got some challenging feelings and I'm frustrated, and they're red alert. They're immediately dysregulated and they're going, okay, we're just trying to keep it okay. And so now what do I do? Because you just kind of overflowed everything.
Hmm.
And so the challenge there is just to say, okay, well, I'm going to temper it a little bit. Not that we can't go there, but I want to make sure you're okay first. And so this is where you get people saying, why is it so easy with somebody else? I hear that a lot of times at couples. They go, well, I can talk to any one of my friends, and this is never an issue. And then I talk to you, and now it's a problem. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're different. Mary, I think you and I, both as harpers, we could sit down and we could wax poetic on emotions and
Yeah.
have easy ones and difficult ones and questions and answers. And we'd probably go, this is amazing.
That was so I feel so filled up
Yeah.
afterwards,
Yeah, I'd
yeah.
be like, this is so fun. And,
Yeah.
and then I get home and my wife might say, well, was it accurate? Did you say a bunch
Mm.
of stuff that made factual sense? And I go, I don't know. I mean, it's how I felt.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't make her wrong and us right.
Yeah.
It just means we see it different.
Right.
And so I think, to speak to your question, what we're really trying to do is kind of say to them, hey, you're okay. Let's go
Mm.
there together.
Yeah. Wow, so good. You talk about under stress, peacemakers withdraw and become passive or suppress their true thoughts. They may agree outwardly while disconnecting inwardly. Stress leads to numbing, avoidance, or peacekeeping at the cost of authenticity. And I mentioned the say this, not that sections. And also, like, I love that it also kind of starts off of like when each type feels stuck, here's a one sentence, a one liner they can say. to help people like understand where they're coming from. So just kind of speak to, for just the Peacemaker in particular, what are some examples of the say this, not that, or the line they can say when they're feeling stuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Peacemaker, what's interesting is it kind of depends on your primary type for what you want to say, right?
Right.
So what I want to say to them is, well, let's just talk about how you feel,
Yeah.
and they're gonna go, I don't want to do that, and so I think the first step is just to understand if you have a different type, don't speak out of your type, speak to theirs, and so instead of making it about you, make it about them, and so when we make it about them, it's hey, we're gonna be okay, we're just gonna have a difficult discussion, or hey, this is going to feel kind of stressful and yet I want you to engage because I actually want to hear what you think, or if you have an opinion and it's different than the groups, just know we actually value it. I want to encourage you to say it. And so when you give people, and I use the term on ramps in the book, but when you give some people on ramps, they'll usually take it if you make it easy for them to do so.
Right. Yeah, in the book you talked about, I forget his name, but he was on a men's group with you and he was like, "So go with the flow, so go with the flow." This to me is a crossover with the Enneagram type.
Hmm.
Is like so chill, so chill, so chill, and then just like nobody cares what I think, and I'm just like suddenly so upset. And so for a Peacemaker, I suppose like if you were going to coach somebody through that, it's just like learning to speak up before you feel like you've been taken for granted or boundaries have been crossed. Like what are some like internal red blinking lights a Peacemaker should pay attention to before they have the, well, nobody cares about anything that I have
Yeah,
to
because
say?
when they have it, it's usually surprising, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, if I was feeling poorly, you would have known already because I would have told you, and we would
That's
have had a
right.
45-minute discussion about it, and it would have been great. And
Yeah.
so they catch you off guard, and so what I'm always looking for with the Peacemaker is what you're saying reflecting what's going on inside? We want those to be in alignment, and Peacemakers struggle with that because they'll say, well, I'm saying what I think is needed, I'm saying what I think makes this better, but no, it's not me.
Wow, that's
And
good.
so the challenge is just sort of, and it's not in a bad way, but it's how do I show up a little more honestly in those conversations and see what people do? Because a lot of times a Peacemaker believes if I said how I felt, people would opt out. And so the challenge is, well, let's see if that's true.
Right.
Let's
Yeah,
see if it's
gosh.
true.
That's so like spot on. So good. I'm going to talk briefly about thinkers. We're not going to go through all the types. We'll talk about thinkers and harbors, and then everybody should grab the book. But with the thinker's core fear, you said, "Will my ideas be understood and respected?" We talked about that. Are they
Mhm.
accurate? Am I saying something correct? But you go on to say the thinker's core fear is often rooted in childhood experiences in which making sense or compiling achievements was valued above all else. I put that in bold and red in my notes. Many thinkers can recall key moments in which they felt a parent's love deepen based on what they had achieved. And so you are familiar with me and my story. You know that all of the alarm bells are going off there like, oh, well, maybe I'm a thinker. Um, and so, yeah, I guess just talk maybe coming back to that idea of like the first and the second ones. Maybe it's is there similarities to like a we talked about self-preserving fours that they can look like
Mhm.
threes. So if I have this, I've always had that though as a strength though, Jason, is this ability to be like very like I'm going to do really well in the LSAT and solve all the geometry proofs and be very incredibly hyper logical, and then a very very strong empath side as well.
Mhm.
So, are these 2 different woundings that I'm operating out of, or, like, what's going on there? Did I just get double
Yeah,
double
yeah,
doses
maybe.
there? What's
You might
happening?
you might. I mean, you are an overachiever. So I mean, I know
Totally.
this about you're a high performer, so you could have 2 or 3. I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
Right.
think we have that primary secondary. And so if you lived in a house that needed somebody to talk about how it felt because nobody else was, but then you also had the experience of what I say needs to perform, it needs to impress, it needs to be accurate, because the worst thing to do would be to say the thing that doesn't make sense or isn't accurate or doesn't land. You can have both. And I would argue that's more mine, right? So it's kind of like, well, why did I marry a thinker? Well, my secondary is thinker. And so I deeply understand it, even though that's not my primary drive. And I understand it because there are some key moments in my life that I can recall where what I said I got wrong, and I remember how it felt to get it wrong, and it felt bad. I didn't like it, and so I've got this drive to communicate as a harbor about feelings, but what's always operating in the background is also is what I'm saying accurate. And so, just like you, I get a double dose of the 3 a.m. laying awake going, did I speak to feelings? Did I honor those? And was this accurate? Did it make sense? What are people thinking about the legitimacy of what I said?
Totally. Yeah, that last part in particular really speaks to me, to the legitimacy of what I said.
Hmm.
Will it withstand the scrutiny? Will it be respected? Will it uphold the mm,
Always my fear. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what if it didn't and there's a spotlight and you're outed and they're like, you said this and it was
yes,
wrong. And even though I think our healthy self could say, well, we would navigate that, we'd apologize and make it right.
right,
There's a part of us that fears that deeply.
totally. Ooh, that's
And
good.
not everybody's got that.
Yeah,
And so
really?
when you
How
see,
is
yeah,
that?
I mean,
What's that feel
I
like?
thought they did. I wish I didn't have it. But when you see now, if you and I enter into conflict with somebody, now we kind of got these two things that are running at the same time, which is I both want to talk about feelings because it matters a lot to me, and I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
Oof, that's good. Continuing with the thinkers for a second, you were talking about thinkers under stress, big emotions confuse them. They want to make feelings fit into a plan. And if the plan is followed, they expect happiness as the outcome. If someone's still upset, they may feel betrayed by the process or become dismissive. This shouldn't be happening. We followed a plan. And you say, like, one of the reflection questions for thinkers is, why do I get frustrated when people are, quote, too emotional? Where did I learn that reaction? And I just had to stare at that page for like a good 10 minutes because it's a big contradiction in my life, which is I am on one hand a huge empath, very very much a harbor in how you describe that. But there are times, especially with those closest to me, where it's like I cannot carry anymore. Or like I had to take care of everybody when I was little. I had to take care of the trailer after school, whatever. And so yeah, there are these moments when it's like, I don't know, I feel like I'm at my capacity, or I expect those closest to me to be the internal support structure for the harbor at all times. And I'm like, what, you want to have feelings now? Even though, like, other times I'm like, tell me everything you feel. So that really stood out to me as like, gosh, I mean, that again, not to repeat this over and over, but there is that like streak of, as you describe thinkers being kind of cold. Not, I don't know if you've ever used the word cold, but they can come across as like very
Could come
clinical.
across. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
not, but it can
right.
come across that way. And I think it's just capacity for that emotion. And I think even though, if you have the harbor and you're driven by emotion, you still have capacity. And there are still it's still a spectrum, and some people are going to be way on the spectrum and some are not. And so I think we all reach that point where it's just too much. Or we have, I think if you have the harbor thinker combo, you reach a point where it doesn't make sense anymore, and that's where you check out. Is it sort of like, hey, we can both be harbors provided there's some rules, right? And as long as we follow those rules about how much we can share and how much we can feel, you and I are great. But when we kind of break that rule, now we're wrestling with that thinker part that says like, I think we've talked too much about this.
Yeah.
We can't talk about this anymore.
Yeah, and even just, like, the language, like, we've already, like, pointed that out in this episode once, but I catch myself all the time writing emails to, like, my publisher, for example, and I switch fluidly between I feel sentences and I think sentences. Like, it's just, like, back and forth all the way across. So, gosh, I'm just loving this whole we could have this all day long, and it would be the best.
I love it. I want
Okay.
to tell you how I feel. I'm feeling great.
Okay.
This is fantastic.
Good, good, I love it. Okay, so I'm just gonna read a little bit of the descriptions. We've mentioned them a bunch, the harbors. I wanna
Yeah.
read a little bit of the description, and then I wanna talk about the metaphor for it. So the harbor is an emotionally attuned, steady presence who listens with depth and responds with care. Harbors are grounded in compassion and often act as the emotional anchor in their relationships. They hold space through empathy and presence. They create emotional safety through that presence, not performance. They hold space for others to be real. And you talk about, well, let's start with the metaphor that you have for them. What, I mean, it's kind of built into the name, but what is the metaphor for harbors and how can it go very wrong when they aren't regulating?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of baked into it. So, I mean, it's a cove. It's safe from the storm, and so if you think about that in terms of the sea and how that creates this safe place that's often pretty deep, that's really important. But it is also removed from the ocean, right? So it's removed from the lake, it's removed from the larger area. And so while that is a safe place, and you think about even, the great quote, it's like boats can be in the harbor. That's not what they're built for, right?
Yeah.
They're actually built to go out. And so there's this idea that sometimes sitting in that depth forever isn't always helpful.
Yeah.
And we need to put some motion to it.
Right. I'm sitting here smiling so big because we literally live in Morris Cove. We literally live in a cove.
You understand. You understand.
Yes. Yeah, the hurricane, when it occasionally makes it into because we're normally protected by the curve of the land on either side. But when it makes it in, we, get flooded. So that's exactly what you
Mm-hmm.
described. You said that the harbor's core fear is what if I'm too much or not enough for the people I love? The harbor's core fear often stems from a deep fear of abandonment that they have tried to alleviate by providing so much value to others to make it unlikely that they would ever be abandoned. And I just feel like we should camp there for just a second, give honor to that. Maybe talk about that from your story. People, longtime listeners of the show, know that from my story, so we don't have to jump into that. If you're listening for the very first time, just that my mom did leave when I was 9, and you spent my whole life trying to make her regret that, not in a negative way, but just in a look how I turned out, not in a mean
It's
way, but just in a look how I
I'm
turned
only
out.
laughing because I relate.
Yeah.
I relate to what seems like a very logical strategy, and then it's mostly driven by how you feel, right? Which is,
Right.
I don't want that to happen again.
Yeah.
And so I think what we decide is that if we had been a safer harbor for those people, they maybe wouldn't have done that. And so because we weren't, it must have meant we asked for too much or we weren't enough, and so they had to leave and go somewhere else. And so it's on us to communicate so that we can have that depth, but also what harbors are often trying to do is anticipate the feeling because there's safety in anticipating the feeling. And so if I could catch it before I get hurt, that's important.
Well, I'm just going to think about that for the rest of the day. Well, that's super great.
Sorry. No, see, I'm
Woo!
doing it. See, this is dinner party Jason. This is why I'm never invited anywhere. They're just like, that guy's not coming back. I don't like that guy. That's no good.
Okay, so that's actually the perfect transition for our final, kind of big topic, which is the attachment theory. And I know that's a very,
Mhm.
very, very big topic. You spend a big chunk in the book unpacking that. Give us kind of just the intro, beginners, Cliff's Notes version. What the heck is attachment theory? What are the 4 types that are most commonly referred to? How does it influence our communication? Just in 30 seconds. No big
I
deal.
can do that. I
Okay,
actually
good.
can do that. This is
Okay.
easy. I can do
Okay.
this. So attachment theory is really interesting, and it really comes out of research about our relationship with our primary caregiver and how we felt around them and what we experienced. And so they did research with babies, and what's cool is they could never do it again. So as you know about a lot of research, they're like, hey, we tried this out in the 60s. Never
Right.
going to be allowed to do this again. But
Right.
what they did is what they had is a mom was in a room. And it was called the strange situation. They had a stranger there, and the mom would leave, and then they would look at the child and say, "What does the child do when the parent leaves?" And so, what they wanted to see happen was that the child was just okay, right? The child could regulate, just kind of like, "Hey, this is fine. I'm okay." But that happens sometimes. About 50% of people would be what's called securely attached. And what that means, just in really practical terms, is that they believe in relationships. So they believe relationships can be nurturing, that those are safe places, that they can last. If you think about object permanence, and if I look at you and I
Mhm.
turn away, are you still there?
Right.
Those children believe that. Okay, and so
Mm.
the mom would come back and they'd be like, "Hey, mom's back. This is great." So that was one of the styles. The second one was the mom would leave and the kids would be really, really upset, tearful. They'd have a really hard time calming them because the child would be really afraid that the mom was going to come back. Okay. And that would be that relationship, and maybe an inconsistent parent or inconsistent living situation. And so that would be called anxious attachment. And anxious attachment is I really desperately want a relationship, but I'm always afraid the bottom's going to fall out, and that it's probably going to be my fault. And so I need to figure out how to position myself so that doesn't happen. The last one at the time was avoidant, and so the avoidant one was kind of interesting because they're like, I don't even pay attention to mom being here.
Yeah.
Uh, they're here, they're not here. I don't really know. Leave, come back. I don't really care. Now, this was usually a parent who was pretty absent or even neglectful. And so, what that child had learned is that basically, I can't count on people. I really want to, but I can't. And so, the closer I get, the more likely I am to get hurt. And so, I should be really careful not to get too close, even though I want it. But if I get close, I'll probably be abandoned. And then years later, they kind of came up with a combination, which was called disorganized. And disorganized is really anxious and avoidant. And so that comes out of childhoods where people had a lot of trauma or neglect, and they kind of vary between I really want a relationship and I'm afraid of it. And so I kind of call that the push pull. And so for them, what's the struggle is that they're not very consistent. And
Mm,
so if you've had a friend like this, they might be your best friend one day and then they might kind of disappear the next day. And
yeah.
it can be really hard for people to kind of track what's going on.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay, so this is a question I've often wondered about these types. Glad I have you here and I can just hold you captive and ask the question. Which is how did they tell the difference between the avoidant type who was fine when the parent was gone and the secure type who was also fine when the parent was gone? Was it just how happy the secure kid was when they came back, or like how'd they delineate those two?
That's a great question. Yeah, the avoidant really didn't change the whole time.
Okay.
So the secure kind of just showed up as you would expect them to in the situation. So it's like, hey, they're here. I'm glad. I'm happy about this. They're gone. I'm kind of okay too. The avoidant was more, and I'd have to like read the exact thing, but as I remember it, it was they would turn their head away. So it wasn't
Wow.
even just I'm okay. It was sort of like I'm rejecting this idea that I might need you, and so
Wow.
that looked different to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's just so I mean, we could have a whole episode just on that. That's so fascinating to me that even at that age, it's wired into us to go, "This is gonna hurt me, so I'm just not even gonna
Yeah.
act like I need you." That's
Well, because
wow.
all we're doing is, kids are, I mean, the whole world revolves around them. So if something's not working
Yeah.
as a kid, it's called our adaptive child, but our adaptive child says there's a solution here and it's mine. I need to do something different. And so,
Yeah.
if you've ever seen the still face experiment, I don't know if you're familiar
Hmm.
with that, but they, yet another experiment I don't think they could do today, but they have a child and the child's in a high chair and it's interacting with mom. So it's a baby and they're having a great time. And then all of a sudden, they task the mom with going still face. So she is interacting and smiling and playing, and then
Wow.
nothing.
Ooh.
Okay. And
Wow.
and so what you see, and it's honestly, it's very, if you want a good cry, it's really painful to watch because you see this child start to kind of get frustrated. So at first the child's trying to play and well, maybe I can get your attention. And then it gets kind of frustrated and then it gets kind of tearful. And then it kind of ends with the child just kind of checking out and just going like, I'm not even going to try. And so when you think about that as kind of even our attachment and how that worked and how embedded in that stuff is, then you see it in our communication. Because if I believe that there's something I could say that would make someone who's supposed to love me not, you better believe I'm going to be careful.
Right. Woo. Okay.
Yeah.
That was chilling. That story is that experiment is chilling and it's making me feel a lot of feelings right now. We're back to being
It's
harbors.
yeah, we're back to being harbors, and I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I'm glad they did it. I feel for the child and the because I
Hmm.
even think if you're a parent, like you look at that, you go like, how could that happen?
Right.
But yet, if we're not careful, that's the experience,
Wow.
and
Whew.
that's the thing. I think when we think about communication, why it's so important for me to write something that helps us connect to other people is so we don't do that. Because what I believe is true is sometimes we don't mean to, but if a thinker is talking to me in a thinker style, I might do that to them, not even knowing.
Right.
And if you or I are talking to somebody about how we feel and they're doing that, they might not even get that that's how we're interpreting it.
Wow. That's good. That's so good, Jason. One quick last thing on the attachment theory is 50% of people are securely attached. You said that.
Yeah, good for
That
them.
stat blow that yeah, so great for them. Really, truly happy for you.
Yeah, I'm like the guy that got the second place at the Olympics. I'm like, that's awesome.
No,
I'm
it
just
really is.
that's
It
great
really
for
is.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is. But that it's that many people actually blew my mind.
Yeah, and I think I'm like you. I'm like, man, could that be different today? We're probably due for some research on that, but just this idea that we can learn, because I think that the thing I want to give is some hope for people. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, sounds like Jason, there's an exact way to do this, and I'm missing all of it. I just want to tell you that's not true. So what is true is we can heal our attachment style by being around people who are secure and by being around people wanting to be better. And so I always tell people, and I know for me being anxiously attached, what helped me the most is being around secure people who thought I was weird when I was anxious. That
Yeah.
was the most helpful thing, is they were just like, why are you doing that strange thing? And I'm
Mm.
like, doesn't everybody do this? And they're like,
Right.
no, not everybody does that. And they love me anyway, right? They're
Right.
just like, he's going to do a goofy thing where he's going to have to make sure we're okay, and we're okay, but he's going to have to ask. But it's strange. And so over time, you can heal that and go, oh, I don't need that so much anymore.
You know what's just to like come full circle to the top of our conversation, one of the most beautifully redeeming things that I think God did with giving me the marriage that I have, because I've talked on here before, I thought I would never get married. If that's what marriage is, I want no part of it. And for God to have the grace to, and I'm not saying that like every relationship would fall into this category, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't have grace in it. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. But for me to have the person that was meant for me be such a secure attachment
Mm-hmm.
person, be such,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to be in the presence daily. We both work from home, so all day, every day with somebody who is so securely attached, who can be that foil of like, oh yeah, that's, you don't need to worry about that.
Like, you don't have to do that. But what a gift.
It's so beautiful. Such a gift. Such a gift. Okay, so just to kind of wrap us up here, if everybody's listening to this, we've talked a lot about self-awareness, being willing to dig deep, look below, beyond the reflection. You come up with a good shortcut to ask yourself two questions when you are the next time you're talking with somebody and you just seem to be like speaking different languages. What are those two questions, and what work do
Mm.
they do in us?
I think it's important to know, what does somebody else need and what are they fearing. If you can answer that, you see into someone differently. And if you think about it, like, when is the last time we ever just thought that organically? What does this other person need? What do they fear? I mean, it's not to say we're bad people for not thinking it, but it's a atypical thing to do. But if you approach conversation that way, the chances are just asking those two is going to make you so much better. Even if you get it wrong, right? Even if you're like, this is what I think, and you get it wrong, that effort alone is life changing for a lot of people. And what I would say is that if we have been hurt before, maybe we've never had anybody ask that about us. And so just to have someone ask means a lot.
Oh, so good. Jason, I could hang out with you all day, every day. Every time we do an episode, it becomes one of my all-time favorite episodes.
Mm,
So, continuing
I
the
feel the
streak.
same.
Where can they find you? Where can they find this book out today? Everywhere books are sold. Look at that.
I love
So
it.
beautiful.
I
Yeah,
love
let
it.
us
I'm
know
on
all the things.
Instagram. Yeah. So if you're like, man, I just love hearing Jason's voice all the time. Good news. You can find me on socials, on Instagram, and then yeah, the book will be out. And I always tell people, even if you're just a little bit curious, take the free paths assessment and just kind of see where you're at, because I think it's a great starting point.
And where can they take that? And are there any bonuses you're going to be extending through the week?
Yeah, so that's on the website. And then if you take it, you'll get some of the bonuses with it, which is a more in depth video explaining each type, explaining how we interact with some others. So sometimes people say, are there some, Jason, that just are always going to struggle a little? We talk about some of that stuff. So, yep, that's all after the assessment.
Love it. And just tell us the URL for that one more time.
Yeah, so if you go jasonvr.com and then it's /paths, and there's a pop up too. So you'll see it.
Love it. Love it. All right, friends, the book is Discovering Your Communication Type: The 5 Paths to Deeper Connections and Stronger Relationships. It is out today, everywhere books are sold. Go get this in your hands. Make sure you go follow Jason, get more of his wisdom in your life every day. Trust me, you need it. I need it. I watch it every single chance I get. And until next time, friends, this is the Mary Moran Show, and welcome to your Show Up season.